Every man alive has felt it. That pull, that hunger, that force that can make a wise man foolish and a strong man weak. The ancient Stoics didn't run from this force. They studied it. They understood it. And then they mastered it. What they discovered will completely change how you see yourself as a man. We live in a world that sells desire back to you like it's your identity. Every advertisement, every algorithm, every swipe of your thumb, engineered to trigger one thing. Want more, want now, want without thinking. And most men, without even realizing it, have handed over the reins of their own minds to this machine. But here's what no one is telling you. The Stoic philosophers, men like Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus and Seneca, lived in a world just as filled with temptation as ours. Power, pleasure, excess. It was all there. And yet these men became legends of self-mastery. Not because they were emotionless, not because they suppressed every human urge, but because they understood something profound about desire, something most men today will never grasp. In this video, I'm going to break down the Stoic philosophy around physical intimacy and desire, what it really means, how to apply it, and why mastering this one area of your life will elevate every other area of your life. Stay with me until the end, because the final principle is the one that will hit you the hardest. First, let's destroy a myth. Many people hear the word Stoic and think it means cold, detached, a man who feels nothing and wants nothing. That is completely wrong. The Stoics were not against human desire. They were against being enslaved by it. There is a massive difference. Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, one of the most powerful men in human history, wrote in his Meditations, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." He wasn't saying don't feel. He was saying, don't let what you feel control what you do. Epictetus, a man who was born a slave and became one of the greatest philosophers of his age, taught that there are two categories in life: things within our control and things outside our control. Desire, that initial spark, that's human, that's natural. What you do with that desire, that is entirely within your control. And Seneca, perhaps the most direct of all the Stoics, warned, yield not to adversity, trust not to prosperity. Keep before your eyes the full scope of fortune's power, as if she would surely do whatever is in her power to do. In other words, the pleasures of the body are real, but they are also temporary. And when a man builds his identity around chasing them, he becomes a slave to something that was never meant to own him. So what does this mean practically? What does the Stoic approach to physical intimacy actually look like in a real man's life? That's where it gets powerful. Let me ask you something honest. Have you ever made a decision about a woman, about a relationship, about your own body, and looked back later and thought, why did I do that? Maybe it cost you your dignity. Maybe it cost you your focus. Maybe it cost you a relationship you actually valued. For something that meant nothing by morning. You're not weak for having experienced that. You're human. But here's what the Stoics would want you to understand. Desire, when it goes unexamined, becomes a tyrant. Think about this. The Romans called it libido, which didn't originally mean sexuality. It meant passionate longing, the craving for something you don't have. The Stoics observed that this craving has a brutal pattern. You want something, you pursue it, you get it, and almost immediately the satisfaction fades, and the wanting begins again, stronger this time. Modern science has a name for this. It's called the hedonic treadmill, the idea that no external pleasure, no matter how intense, will ever permanently satisfy the craving mind. The man who chases physical pleasure without discipline isn't experiencing more of life. He's experiencing less because he's never fully present. He's always already reaching for the next thing. Epictetus said it plainly. Freedom is not achieved by satisfying desire, but by eliminating it. Now, that sounds extreme, and if taken literally, it would be. But what Epictetus meant was this. True freedom comes not from getting everything you want, but from no longer being desperate for it. When a man is no longer controlled by his desires, he can choose, with full clarity, Full intention, how he acts, who he gives his energy to, and what he allows into his life. That is a level of freedom most men will never taste. And it begins with 4 principles that the Stoics left us. Let's get into them. Principle 1, the pause. The Stoics called it prosos, meaning attention or self-watchfulness. Before you act on any desire, you pause. Not forever, not to torture yourself, just long enough to ask one question. Is this me choosing, or is this the desire choosing for me? Marcus Aurelius practiced this constantly. He would wake each morning and remind himself that the day would bring temptations, provocations, and pulls on his attention. He prepared himself in advance. This is the first shift a man must make. From reaction to intention, the moment between impulse and action. That is where your character lives. That is where your power lives. Most men spend their entire lives in that gap and never even notice it exists. The Stoic man lives there intentionally. Principle 2, voluntary restraint. This one will challenge you. The Stoics practiced something they called ascesis, voluntary self-discipline, deliberately choosing not to indulge even when you can. Seneca would eat simple food, even when Rome's finest feasts surrounded him. He would wear plain clothing. He would voluntarily sit with discomfort, not because he was punishing himself, but because he was training himself. He wanted to know, with certainty, that he was stronger than his appetites. Applied to physical desire, this means this: a man who can choose when and whether he acts on physical impulses rather than simply reacting, to them is operating at a fundamentally different level than most men around him. This isn't about shame. This isn't about repression. It's about sovereignty. The question is not, can you feel desire? The question is, does the desire own you, or do you own it? Principle 3, the right relationship with another person. Here is where many people misread Stoicism. The Stoics were not anti-relationship. They were not anti-intimacy. What they opposed was treating another person as merely a vehicle for your own pleasure. Marcus Aurelius deeply loved his wife, Faustina. Epictetus spoke of marriage with genuine warmth. These were not cold men living in isolation. But they believed, powerfully, that physical intimacy without virtue was hollow. That when a man approaches another person purely as a means to satisfy himself, he degrades not only them, but himself. The Stoic view was this: true connection requires seeing the other person as a full human being, with their own logos, their own rational soul, their own dignity. When a man carries this awareness into his relationships, something changes. He stops consuming. He starts connecting, and paradoxically, the depth of what he experiences becomes far richer than anything the purely pleasure-seeking man will ever know. Principle 4. Channel the energy. The Stoics understood what modern psychology is only beginning to articulate. Sexual and creative energy are deeply connected. When a man constantly dissipates his energy, chasing physical pleasure without purpose, he bleeds out the very fuel that could have built something extraordinary. Think about the men throughout history who created the most, built the most, achieved the most. Many of them spoke about the power of controlled, channeled energy. Nikola Tesla, Michelangelo, Isaac Newton. Men who poured an almost superhuman intensity into their work. The Stoics would not be surprised by this. They understood that the body's energy is finite, and a man who learns to redirect that energy into his craft, his mission, his legacy, becomes something rare. This doesn't mean suppression. It means direction. You are not killing the fire. You are pointing it somewhere worthy of burning. I want you to imagine 2 men. The first man wakes up and his morning is already controlled by impulse. He reaches for his phone, checks social media, falls into distraction. Throughout his day, every decision he makes is a reaction to what feels good, what feels comfortable, what satisfies the moment. When he's around a woman he's attracted to, he loses himself. He becomes anxious, needy, performing. Because his desire is running him, he ends each night having given away his attention, his energy, and his presence to 100 different things, none of them chosen. Now, the second man. He's not without desire. He feels everything the first man feels. But he has done the work. He has practiced the pause. He has trained voluntary restraint. He has learned to see other people clearly, not as objects, but as souls. And he has learned to point his energy somewhere. When this man walks into a room, people feel it. Not because he's trying to impress anyone, but because a man who is at peace with himself, who is not chasing or needing or grasping, radiates something rare. Women sense it. Men respect it. He senses it in himself. This is what the Stoics were pointing toward. Not a life without passion, but a life where you hold the torch, the flame doesn't hold you. And here is the deepest truth of all. The man who has mastered himself in this area, the man who no longer needs anything from the outside world to feel complete, becomes paradoxically far more attractive, far more capable of genuine love, and far more powerful in every domain of his life, because he is free. Stoicism was never a philosophy for people who want a comfortable life. It was a philosophy for people who want a real one. The ancient masters knew something we are only now being forced to rediscover, that a man who cannot govern himself cannot govern anything else. His relationships will be unstable. His purpose will be unfocused. His power will be borrowed, never truly his own. But the man who does the work, who pauses before he acts, who trains himself through voluntary discipline, who treats others with genuine respect, who channels his energy towards something that matters, that man becomes rare, and rare things carry great value. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." Desire is not your enemy. It is your teacher. The question is, are you willing to be the student? If this video made you think differently, even for a moment, drop a comment below and tell me which of the 4 principles hit you the hardest. The pause, voluntary restraint, seeing others clearly, or channeling your energy. I read every single comment. And if this is the kind of content you want more of, real philosophy, real mindset applied to real life, hit subscribe and join this community of men who are choosing to live differently. The next video is going to go even deeper. You do not want to miss it.